Welcome to First Peoples Cultural Council's 2025 online learning series, Our Stories, Our Voices. FPCC provides grants, training, and resources to support BC First Nations in their language, arts, and heritage revitalization efforts. The music you just heard is by Sherry Ptolemy, and the song is called The Roots. Thank you, Sherry, for allowing us to start our sessions with your beautiful music. My name is Kim Jones, and I have Gitxsan and British Canadian ancestry. I grew up in Kitwanga in northwestern BC, but today I'm joining you from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. I am a senior heritage coordinator with FPCC and have been with the heritage team since 2020. Today's session is called Promoting Indigenous Cultural Heritage and Wellbeing Through Food Sovereignty, and we are grateful to have Jacob Beaton and Julian Napoleon join us as panelists. After today, we have 2 sessions left in our online learning series. The next session is called Finding My Voice in Formline, Studying Classical to Creating Contemporary, where we'll be learning from Shoshana Green. And that's tomorrow, November 18th at 11:30 a.m. Our final session is called Gwayi Music Revitalization and Festival, FPCC Pilot Project, with speakers Lindsay May Willie and Mike Sherritt, which is next Wednesday, November 26th at 3 p.m. If you would like to join either of those sessions, please visit FPCC's website to register. You may have noticed that your microphones and cameras are turned off, and they will remain off for today's session, but you'll be able to ask questions for our panelists using Zoom's Q&A function. We request that the questions remain focused on heritage and well-being through food sovereignty and/or the experiences of the panelists. If you have questions or feedback for FPCC, please email us at ols@fpcc.ca. That's OLS for Online Learning Series. Today's session will be approximately 60 minutes with time for questions and answers, and it will be recorded and posted on YouTube in the coming months. Now, I'd like to introduce you to my colleague, Lucas Roque, who will be facilitating this session. Lucas is a heritage planner with FPCC's heritage team and has a lot of experience working with Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities around the world as a UNESCO expert, helping them plan and implement intangible cultural heritage safeguarding plans. Lucas, I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you, Kim. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's amazing to see so many people gather for our online series today. As Kim said, my name is Lucas Rock. I'm Heritage Plan at FPCC. I joined FPCC in 2022, and currently I lead the Braided Infrastructure Program. And I'm joining you today from the ceded territory of Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And it's an honor to facilitate today's panel on promoting Indigenous cultural heritage and well-being through food sovereignty. And we are fortunate to receive Jacob Beaton and Julian Napoleon, who will share their experiences in supporting Indigenous food sovereignty and revitalization of agricultural practice rooted in time immemorial traditions. So their projects and activities bring inspiring examples of how food systems are deeply connected to cultural heritage and community well-being. So thank you so much, Jacob and Julian, for joining us today. And I'd like to invite you to introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about you. Jacob, do you want to start?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just want to acknowledge a little bit of anxiety in the air because of the incredibly high turnout to this workshop, which I think is fantastic. So thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your day to be here. My name's Jacob Beaton. My tribal name is Jopruskatwin. It means a busy eagle. I'm Lachskeek Eagle because my mother's eagle, and we're matrilineal society. Living in Gitxsan territory. So I'm not Gitxsan, but I'm very pleased to live here. I grew up half my childhood in Gitxsan territory, so it's kind of like home to me. And yeah, I started Tea Creek model in 2020. Um, did our first training in 2021. Got a lot of attention, which was really unexpected and interesting. We won a land award from Real Estate Foundation in 2022. We're declared United Nations Food Hero in 2022 as well, which was a big shock and surprise. And then we peaked in 2023 in terms of our funding and the amount of people coming through here, the volume. And the last part of my introduction is I'm also the executive director of the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Association, which is our nonprofit society. And I can share a little later more around our impacts. And that'll be it for my intro. If you want to do a little bit more of a deep dive into our story, I highly recommend the Tea Creek film. So www.teacreekfilm.ca. It does a very good job of telling our story and my personal story as well. It's free on CBC Gem. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jacob. Julian?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Julian Napoleon. I'm Daneza and Cree, and well, mixed ancestry, also Ukrainian. And I live here on my reserve, Soto First Nations, up in Treaty 8 in the northeastern part of the province. I spearheaded a Misk farm, and I also established a nonprofit organization here with it's completely indigenous called the Clincesa Cultural Society. And these are two, the farm and the society work hand in hand in the work that we're doing on the ground here. And I'm also a professional agrologist. So I work a lot with the provincial government around Indigenous food sovereignty projects. And yeah, so I'll delve a little more into that later in the conversation, but that's just the kind of quick intro to who I am. And grateful for all of you for showing up today, and look forward to delving into it. And hopefully Jacob and I can be of some use to all of you. Yeah.
Thank you, Julian. Um, so the first question for you both is to share a little bit more about the work you have been done and what do you offer through your projects. Just give us more details and a little bit of history. How do you land on this experience of food sovereignty and food systems? Do you want to go first, Jacob?
Sure. Yeah, so for me, the quick story is that I grew up in the bush, kind of. Oh, not kind of. I did a lot of my childhood, and it was a highlight of my childhood, coming from a place of a lot of intergenerational trauma from both sides of my family. The outdoors, specifically the forest, and being outside was kind of my sanctuary, my safe place. My wife also grew up, in the bush, and we always wanted to have that experience for our kids. So our plan was buy a farm. I tell people it's like real life Monopoly. We'd over, a couple decades of hard work, we owned a few different houses, sold them all in order to be able to buy a farm. That'll be a theme that I think we might touch on is the challenges that status Indians, like such as myself and Julian, have in getting financing. Like you just can't just go get a mortgage. And I ran into one of the many barriers of being a status Indian trying to farm off reserve, which is it was and still is very difficult for status Indians to get a mortgage to buy specifically farmland that's off reserve. So we did that trade, and we bought this old farm, which is beautiful, Kitwanga. And our plan was just to quietly, live a self-sustaining and, food sovereignty for ourselves. What I didn't realize is that by doing this, it was an unintentional act of resistance, like that we were going against this colonial history of it being illegal for First Nations people to practice their food sovereignty in this country, which is very much across the whole country from coast to coast and in between. So my ancestors are from the coast of BC, and there were so many rules and regulations forbidding First Nations people from harvesting and from the ocean using their traditional methods and tools. And there was always that environment of severe oppression that I remember as a kid. And that extends as well to the prairies and to the mountains and everywhere. So word traveled very quickly. Hey, a First Nations guy's farming again, you know. And so literally day one of buying the farm, we had local Gitxsan elders come by and hug us and welcome us and explain like how happy they were because sorry, I'm getting emotional, but just how happy they were because this was their childhood memory is growing up on Gitxsan farms and ranches that had been outlawed and banned. And as one of them said, they got corralled onto reserves. So it wasn't, I tell people it wasn't something that I premeditated. It was, I feel like it's something that was put on me, this responsibility to do what we're doing. Because First Nations people just kept coming, man. Like our second year here, I had relatives coming from, you know, the islands, you know, like Hakatla, Loch Walams, like taking ferries, you know, to come here, to come to our farm and be on a farm. And so that's when I started researching Indigenous food sovereignty and the whole history of it, starting from Indigenous people in South America, becoming a global movement around Indigenous land rights, cultural rights, language rights, how it's a complete holistic thing. So that's my journey kind of being pulled into it, and then running into people like Julian and finding out, yeah, there's not a lot of us who are doing this, you know, that are have been able to practice this way. Like we're few and far between in terms of the kind of stuff we're doing, and we need a lot more support. There's a lot of beautiful knowledge in our communities, a lot left in our elders, you know, like the ones who came here. I've learned so much from them. And it's so important to practice Indigenous food sovereignty because it's the solution, which we'll talk about. Like it solves so many challenges all in one. Thanks.
You wanna go, Julian?
Yeah, thanks for sharing, Jacob, and speaking from the heart. Appreciate that a lot. Yeah, we share some aspects of our journey, I think, well, if you asked me when I was a child what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always said farmer. I've been an unwavering desire. And I lived a very kind of ungrounded childhood, a lot of moving around, a lot of food insecurity in the home. And I think I grabbed onto a farm as like this most grounded existence, and that you had a home where your food was coming from and you lived in connection to that land. And like as early as my mind could grasp those concepts, I latched onto it, and it's been unwavering. Um, yeah, and I grew up in this kind of dual reality where I was with my mom, who's wonderful, wonderful woman down south, and she always grew these huge gardens, and I experienced that abundance. And and then when I was about 9 years old is when I started coming up to my reserve to spend the summer with my family up here. And my first experience when I arrived here was going into our agawan, which is a Cree word for meat rack, where we make our dried moose meat. And my entire extended family, there was like over 20 people in there, two moose being processed, five elders cutting meat, doing hides outside. And I realized like, oh yeah, this is who I am. It was like crash course immersion. And I had so many people from my family here just take me in and mentor me in different ways as I grew up. And yeah, I kind of had this, like I say, this duality. And after many years, I ended up deciding to pursue formal education at UBC's Faculty of Land and Food Systems. And at the beginning of that journey, I realized like there's this narrative, like it's literally the faculty's land, food, and community, right? And yet there was no inclusion of Indigenous food systems in that academic space at that time. Um, what was there, to give them credit, is a few of these, kind of agroecology huge names from Latin America, um, and their overview of those systems that kind of got really co-opted into kind of Caucasian sustainable agriculture narrative. So, really like Miguel Altieri and a few of these other people who are really inspirational to me at that time. But yeah, what I'm saying here is I just was hitting my head against the wall because I would try to bring up indigenous food systems in all these narratives and classes, and it was just this total erasure. But through that journey of the 5 years I spent there, I kind of saw this emergence, and now it's become really integrated into the core curriculum. There were a few of the people there that were very supportive of that work and kind of championing it themselves. And that kind of became the purpose of that work. And coming out of university and then kind of pursuing this professional agrologist career path that my degree led me to, I got there and realized, wow, they're at square one. Like there's no understanding of indigenous food systems or acknowledgement that these are in fact agricultural and horticultural systems. Just the lens is so limited, it's so compartmentalized that the view is just so limited of what people can understand. And when you push, and you encounter ignorance, there's often push back or just a shutdown. And I think that's kind of unfortunately often human nature we encounter, especially within institutional settings. And so I'm still navigating that, in my career, and there's some wonderful people that I get to collaborate with now. But that's a whole other narrative. With me, as soon as I got done school, I wrapped up school in Haida Gwaii and just knew I wanted to come home and farm. And, many, many years ago, when I was visiting my reserve for a long-term visit, I always just walk with my family all around here. And we are walking down these natural terraces along the river, the riparian zone. And I remember thinking, wow, this would be an incredible place for a farm. And I just like got down on my hands and knees, and like all my cousins like, what are you doing? And I just started digging into the ground and with my hands, and that soil was like pure, loose, black, like beyond loam. It was just organic matter, and it was as deep as I could dig with my hands. I got down 2 feet deep, and it was still just black and loose and a nice fine tilth. And I just thought, this is incredible. It's in the middle of my sustainable agriculture degree. And I mean, but also just a lifetime of engagement with gardening and wanting to walk this path and realizing that right here in my family's area of my reserve is the richest growing conditions I've ever encountered. And so I just knew, okay, as soon as I'm done school, I'm going to come here and I'm going to start a community farm and try to work towards addressing community food security here on my reserve. And around that same time, I started collaborating and working for an early mentor of mine in food sovereignty, Don Morrison, who really kind of laid a foundation of theory for me that I continue to hold close to my heart to this day. And very grateful for that early mentorship. Yeah, but coming back here to establish a MISC farm, and Jacob and I have had many lengthy conversations about this, but I've had to navigate doing this work on reserve. So Jacob's navigated establishing Tea Creek off reserve as an Indigenous person in the colonial state, and I've navigated establishing on reserve, and they're both been wrought with many challenges that we discuss all the time. But also for me at that stage in my life, and really still today with the real estate environment, it was the only feasible pathway for me to start farming in a way that I could feel that it was like safe to take ownership and to build out from there to bring other people into that circle. that I just could never experience, say, leasing land or working on a settler farm. So yeah, just jumped in here, and it's been a good few years now. But when I first started, I was living in a wall tent, so like a canvas tent, a trapper tent, and I started clearing where I wanted to build a cabin, and started clearing where the two fields, or what seemed like natural fields, where I wanted to farm. And an early memory I have is that first day where I started clearing with my chainsaw and some hand tools. Uh, I was about an hour into it, and I looked up the trail I had cut in to where I was camped, and two of the elders from my family were walking in, and they were in all their chainsaw gear, carrying their saws, and they didn't even say anything to me. They just came in and they started working on either side of me, and we worked for a couple hours, and it was hot and getting hotter, and then all we kind of just had a consensus without speaking that we were going to take a break in the shade, and we sat down, and we were drinking some water, and then my uncle Ted, who's the oldest living man, who's a band member here, he said, my dad was going to build a house for us here when I was a kid. And that's why it's already a natural opening that you noticed and you wanted to build here. He saw the same thing. And then Indian Affairs came and they built the first house on the reserve for my family over there because it was closer to the road. And so that was like the first thing where I was like, wow, really? Like this guy is my great grandpa. He passed away 2 years before I was born. And I'd only heard of him in all these stories about how he was kind of the most brilliant cultural knowledge holder, and was very successful in kind of navigating modernity as it was imposed upon him. But just a excellent trapper, made snowshoes by hand, knew all the old songs in our language, made beautiful drums, all these things. And then they told me, down below there, he had a farm that fed the whole reserve. And that was where I had decided to establish my farm, but I didn't know this story. And so I was like, wow, really? And since then, I've gathered many more stories and found remnants of the old root cellar and the old ice box where they would cut river water and put ice in the ground for a summer fridge. And and I heard more and more, and had more elders come and say, "Oh, your grandpa, he used to feed our whole family," and so I realized that I was just almost following this pathway that had been laid out for me in a kind of subconscious plane, or like maybe a heart plane or something, because it was like really just felt like this destiny path. And so in the beginning it started really small, trying to navigate establishing farm infrastructure in a place with no water, no power, not even a road in the beginning. And so it started really small, and now it's growing into something that's not Tea Creek big, but there's a community here now, and we grow a ton of food. Jacob's organization, which I kind of serve as an advisor to when I have capacity, the Indigenous Food Sovereignty Association, they supported us now for the second year to give our produce away to Indigenous folks in the region. So last year with the launch, we distributed 10,000 pounds of produce for free into Indigenous households. This year, it's estimated to be well over 30,000. I think we got about 40,000 pounds of produce directly into Indigenous households, completely free of cost. So that's a huge thanks to IFSA and Jacob's team. And then also, we kind of like, if we were to, we also donate as much as we can too, right? It's like that helps us, and then we just pay the rest forward. yeah, and then we've done the training program here in collaboration with Tea Creek. And, the model's been evolving and it's like this flux. Jacob and I will probably share more about this together as we move forward, but just trying to have this ongoing experiential and dynamic learning around what works and what doesn't in terms of the work we're trying to do, and also in terms of our own mental and physical health and emotional health and well-being, and uh, and just in efficacy in terms of having the biggest impact helping Indigenous people um, not only address food security, food sovereignty, but also in the work around building skills, job skills, farming skills. And I think that the higher level part of it all is building deeply connected community, connected to each other, connected to the land and waters, to the spirit world, and to our ancestors. And I think that's the big purpose that we sometimes maybe don't even mention as we get into the nitty-gritty of it all. Um, but yeah, one last thing before I stop rambling is this year saw the establishment of a sweat lodge on the farm, which is something I was looking over in my notes. When this was all just an idea I was conceptualizing, and there was no Amisk farm, and they had the list of essential elements, and at the top was a sweat lodge. And it has taken 6 years of working here. Finally, my father moved home, who's a pipe carrier, and with my son being born this year, my father and I we built the lodge together. Sorry, I get emotional just thinking of it all because it's so beautiful to me. But we built that lodge together down at the lower field, and actually beside the lower field, where we grow the vast majority of our produce, is our cultural teaching grounds, the cultural grounds, which was established with some support from FPCC. So thank you. But that lodge is there. So when you look down at the field, you can see the lodge, and then beyond that is our open grounds, where we'll be leading ever increasing amount of cultural programming over time. And it's all integrated, of course, with the kitchen up here, which is the beating heart of operations, where we share food as community every day during the growing season. So yeah, it's a lot. And I think like where we could go from here is kind of just exploring like what's been working, what hasn't been working, challenges, successes. And yeah, I do hope that there's some folks here that are like either in early stages or at any stage of taking on this work, or even just having inspiration to do food sovereignty work for their communities, and that we might offer some insights from our journeys that might be helpful, and or we could take it anywhere people want. Yeah.
thank you, Julian, and thank thank you, Jacob, as well for this wonderful starting and for opening your heart to us. And I was hearing you talking about this experience of growing up in the bush and also this discovery about this is who I am and about the feedback from the elders and how this have in some way changing communities, the families. And I was wondering or would like to hear from you about this relationship between this land-based knowledge you were developing and how these experiences have been supporting the revitalization of heritage, of language, arts, and the indigenous well-being. Could you share something about that? Jacob?
Sure, yeah, I'll do my best. I find language fascinating. I think I'll start with English, which, I've delivered some workshops on this already where I didn't realize until starting Tea Creek and learning from a lot of different elders who've come here, how we have changed in English, then the words that we use when we talk about Indigenous peoples has changed significantly over the last 200 years. So a big one is the words used to describe First Nations leaders used to be like king, queen, lord, lady, and you can see that if you look at any of the old photographs from the 1800s even describing like photos, a photo of a First Nations chief would call him king something or lord something, queen so and so. And the word chief didn't come into existence until Indian Act, where the much more diminutive, putting down of First Nations leadership. And in the area of Indigenous food systems, it's the same thing. So all the elders that came here describe growing up on patches. So if you're settler ancestry, you're a farmer. If you're Gitsan ancestry, you were a patcher, meaning you just. And so every time they describe this, I pictured like a front yard, backyard garden. Saying, "Oh, I grew up on my helping my grandmother with her patch, our family's potato patch, or our garden patch." And it wasn't until a couple of years ago I was in one of these conversations with an elder in our potato patch, and I said, "How big was your grandmother's potato patch that you keep talking about?" And I was expecting backyard, and he said, "Oh, 6 acres." And and I just started laughing. I said, "Dude, that's not a patch. That's a farm. Like anywhere else, that is a farm. Like if you're white and you farm half an acre, they call you a market gardener, market farmer, small scale farmer, right? They don't say, 'Oh, you got a patch.'" So I started asking, and the biggest was 80 acres. 80 acres. And they called it a patch. Oh yeah, our family had a patch. 80 acres, and they used to export vegetables. The Skitsan family was a major vegetable exporter. Like they exported all the way up to the Yukon. You know what I mean? Uh, a generation and a half ago, 2 generations ago. So I just wanted to start with that. Like, I think that's an important thing to think about in decolonization of our brains is understanding that the English words we use when we refer to First Nations in contexts such as food production are very diminutive, very reducing us to being the myth of being hunter-gatherers. Everything we do is small scale and not as big. So that's, I think, step one when we talk about language is looking at a lot of us, our first language is English, and it's trained us to think of Indigenous peoples in small, minimized ways and our history. So we need to challenge that, and we need to ask inquiring questions when we're being talked to by elders in English, like how big was this? Where was it? And start going, okay, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be using that word in English when we're talking about. So it's funny. We've kind of reverse adopted, like we now call our fields patches. Because I'm like, no, dude, like we're the patchers, like you guys were the farmers. We're just doing small scale here. And then with the Gitsan language, we've had a lot of language speakers come here and educate us. So the first one was our first year, a language speaker started talking about soil. And again, in English, we have like dirt, soil, earth, and the words are kind of meaningless. In Indigenous languages, there's so much more meaning. Like when I was living in Coast Salish territory, talking to a elder language speaker who's since passed away, and he was telling me about how like the word for earth means like the center of your being, like your soul. Um, and then the Gitsan words for dirt and soil means living or alive, like living soil, living earth. Like so that means that, in ancient times, the Gitsan people understood what is now considered like cutting edge modern science, which is that soil is a complex living ecosystem. It isn't dirt. It isn't ground, it isn't earth. Like all these English connotations kind of mean dead, when you really think about it. Very simplistic views, whereas Indigenous people understood the complexity of our ecosystem in very intimate ways. Probably the most significant shock to me over the last few years was It started with a descendant of one of the first European settlers to come to Gitxsan territory. She dropped by for a visit, and she said that her great grandmother, before she died, said to her, "Everything you think about the history here is wrong." She said, like, uh, that when her ancestor first arrived, that they didn't have to cut down any trees. They came to fully developed farming ranch land, fields as far as the eye could see. Fences were already there in a lot of places. Buildings were already there, and they got to basically just occupy, take over this developed farmland. And what she said to this great granddaughter is, "There's more forest today than there's ever been, in this area." And that was a shock to me because I thought, oh, the myth is that settlers showed up and with their bare hands had to carve out their own little piece of the world here, battle back the forest and create a field. And so I'm going to fast forward, and I was talking to a language speaker, an elder, very old elder here, about this, and he just laughed and said, "Yes, of course." He said, like, and so we learned that the way, and I also talked to a nearly 100, the first settler born in this valley, Kitwanga. I got to talk to him before he died, and he confirmed it. He said when he was his first memories were fields as far as the eye could see, and now it's forest here. And so I was like, what the heck is going on? So embedded in the Gitxsan language, there's this word um, called Anlaw. There's locations on the river called Anlaw. So there's one in Gittin was the first Anlaw I knew about. And I see Nathan's here, and I think he's got land at Anlaw in Getting Max. And he said to me, "Oh, there's Anlaws all over." He said, "There's one right down here. If you go down in this location, there's an Anlaw close to Gitsigukla, and there's." He said, "Do you know what it means?" I said, "No." He said, "It means caribou crossing. Anlaw is where the caribou would cross the river." And so I started researching and learned that, oh yeah, like even in reading early settler diaries, I've got a book back here I managed to find. They talked about the abundance of caribou and elk here, and how the you didn't have to bring any food if you were a settler, that the Indians, aka the Gitxsan, had more food than you could ever want for a good price. So don't bring food. Just bring your families, and you can buy whatever you need. And then and one of the diaries said you could just reach off your horse saddle and grab a caribou or an elk or a deer, and you'd have all the meat you need. That you didn't even need a gun. So it's here. That fascinates me, that the landscape here has changed so significantly, and the entire ecosystem has changed to the point where there's no caribou. Obviously, for those who know this area, there's no caribou herds anymore, and yet there's all these place names that are called caribou crossing in the language, and there's no elk. The elk are extinct, and the deer are very, very few. And so our new traditional food here is moose, because the moose came in as colonizers with the forests, right? So they moved in from the east, and I've understand that from other nations as well. So I just wanted to share that, like, there's a lot in the language that we can learn, um, and understand our history a little better, especially when we are looking at, and we're also a living culture. So I'm not disputing that hunting moose is a traditional activity. It is now. But our ancestors didn't hunt, like a long time ago, didn't hunt moose, because they didn't exist here. So it's a new tradition, and then farming as well became a new tradition, which is something I learned about, like that. When I cut into the soil here, so Julian's soil story gave me the ancestor bumps, the goosebumps, because we had a similar experience here where we plowed the earth for what appeared to be the first time in some of our fields. Did what I call the establishing plow. We only do it once, just to kind of get into the soil and start working it. And there were all these layers, like all these sparkles in the sunlight, and there were these carbon layers, like charcoal, going all the way down in each of the fields we plowed. And of course, being ignorant at the time, I was like, man, there's people sure did a lot of camping here. Like, there's must have been camping everywhere. And when you talk soil, like, it takes a long time to build soil, right? For it to happen naturally, it takes a very long time. Hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years to build soil that might be this deep, might be a couple feet deep. And I'm looking at all these, and they go down like as far as the plow goes down. All these, and it was, and I'm not exaggerating. It was like very clear throughout. And we now, in Western science, they call this biochar, and this is now cutting edge technology. But this is something that obviously First Nations people were doing for an incredibly long time here to proactively be involved in the land and land-based food systems. So yeah, I wanted to share that because I found out after we bought it from the elders coming here that this is a very significant food producing place, just like Julian. We're sitting on an ancient food forest full of species that are unfortunately in decline because people today are not actively maintaining and caring for the land in the same way. Like we have hazelnuts that are fire adapted here. They've been cultivated with fire for so long that they've become fire adapted, yet we don't burn anymore, so they struggle. Same thing with our indigenous apples. There's two species of indigenous apples. Both of them are in decline because people think, oh, they're wild. They just go and battle it out in the forest, and that's not true. They require some human participation in our ecosystem for them to thrive and do well. I did a video series on it. We went in and just like pruned and took care of a couple of these indigenous apple trees 3, almost 4 years ago now, and the difference today is staggering. Just from one, I started to realize, yeah, this is how our ancestors did it. Like they were out there proactively in the berry patches, proactively. They weren't just letting things go wild. Like they were out there because just us spending a couple hours 4 years ago has transformed these ancient apple trees. And we could do this. We could spend a couple of hours on, a couple different patches, and the impact over years is really significant. So, um, yeah, that's the story I wanted to share for now. So I'll leave it. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob. Before I pass the floor to Julian, I just want to remind you that we have the Q&A open, and we will probably open the Q&A soon. So if you want to start, add your questions, we'll be glad to answer them. So Julian, turn it go.
Yeah, I mean, thank you again, Jacob. I always appreciate everything you share, and yeah, it made me think a lot. The colonial reality is like the terra nullius narrative required an erasure of very complex indigenous systems of land management that were taking place across Turtle Island. And very similar here in that our landscape historically was open plain that was in that state due to vast herds of bison combined with our complex landscape burning practices. That for us, the last bison, similar to other stories across the plains, was extirpated from my territory in 1908, but the burning practice continued well into my childhood before the government shut it down. So I have memories of elders lighting the hills here at Moberly Lake on fire as a child, and I remember asking, why do they do that? And it makes the berries grow better. It makes the deer come in. It makes the feed better for the deer and the elk. And it's the same thing at Tea Creek and Misk Farm. You start walking around, and we're like in these epicenters of our ancestors' seasonal village sites. And there's just these complex polycultures of indigenous food crops. They're food forests, and it is right there, like the same hazelnuts that are growing at Tea Creek. They're growing here, and it seems like we're now unveiling the story that Jacob shared with me, that these hazelnuts were very comprehensively, selectively bred by Indigenous people and brought up here. They weren't always here. They were brought here from his territory, and they journeyed around. And there's countless stories like that in our nations and territories that are often swept under the rug because they present a threat to the norm that has to be upheld for the legitimacy of the colonial state. Yeah, and it is kind of feeds into this like it feeds into the modern language issues, like you say, around um, this patch versus farm, or even in a professional career, it doesn't really seem to matter what sort of academic or professional achievements um, you get. I as a someone working as doing field biology for a decade could be labeled an Indigenous guardian, and a first-year settler student will be called a biologist. And that's the kind of reality that we navigate, right? So those are some of the big issues. But yeah, this place, I'll share one more quick story because I know we're short on time, but going all the way back to when there was buffalo here and this was open grassland, um, and a bit of a frontier time. Like obviously, my Daneza ancestors have been here since time immemorial, but they were joined by migrations of other Indigenous people coming from the east that were pushed by settlers. Um, and they were looking for a place where they could continue to exist without the changing reality that was being experienced in places that are, what's come to be known as Quebec and in Montreal or in Ontario. Um, and one of my ancestors was an Anishinaabe man who came, and he was, it was in the time of Louis Riel. He actually was involved in the Red River Rebellion and ended up out here. There was no settlers here. There was some trading posts, but there was no permanent settlers. And he married a Daneza woman, and he immediately, recognized just the richness of this place. And with the decline of basically with the state mandated eradication of the bison that did take place in Canada, which is kind of not talked about very much, but it did, just like in the States. Um, he established a cattle ranch. So he was the first person to settle, even though his family was mixed Daneza and Iroquois. Um, but to establish a large working ranch, very first one in the Peace region, right? Just outside of what would become known as Dawson Creek. And the place, still no white settlers. The place become known as Iroquois Town because he had countless relatives coming from out east, and they had a bunch of Dene people there, a bunch of Cree people, and they ran a huge, super successful hay and cattle operation. Right. This is right around the time of the signing of the treaty, and they the encroachment of or a desire to establish settlements, and they saw what my ancestor Napoleon Toma had done, and very much like, well, we could do this. This is, we should be ranching here, and so that came about the signing of the treaty, and the narrative got kind of flipped in that they viewed, here with Treaty 8, they said the way to get the Indian problem dealt with is to have them homestead. They should be on reserve, and they tried to bring about trying to force an end to our semi-nomadic ways and try to force us to establish farms. So it's a bit of a complex history, but through that there was like this promise. People might have heard of cows and plows, and that if you settle on the reserve, you'll get every year you'll get a cow, and in the beginning you'll get a plow. Every year you'll get a cow, and farm the land. That's grow your grain. You make your bannock, and of course the ground that we were given on our reserves was marginal by intention often, not everywhere, but in terms of like some of these other communities out on the prairie where there was uh, the more suitable potential, it was often given marginal lands and not enough land to really run these operations. Like my great great grandpa Napoleotomo was farming many sections of land and had a whole community of people there, and that at that scale was like very successful. Um, yeah, with that process, he was actually uprooted from his farm. Um, he was away trapping, and basically the land was seized. He was told he had no legal title, um, and then it was given to. Yeah, at the same time as they did that, they were literally handing sections of land to white settlers that were willing to start farming, and so his land was given to quite a wealthy family that wanted to establish a ranch there. And so there's all these kind of stories about, I guess, Don Morrison would say complementariness and contention. And as you kind of navigate the history, you kind of pick out those. And so there's a lot of contention around farming. And despite many families here having like a strong history of skill and knowledge, being excellent cattlemen and ranchers and food growers and hayers, and doing this for generations. It almost felt like colonialism here, it was very late and it very like intentionally broke that strong relationship and then replaced it with something non-functional. And so in the work that I'm doing now, I feel like I'm working to reestablish that functional relationship of land management integrated within a more holistic Indigenous life wave practice. Um, and that really brings out a lot of, like, we have so many community members come here every day, and it evokes that living history in a lot of our elders. Um, there's like this understanding, like they sit here and they understand what we're doing and they remember it, and it ignites or reignites something in them. So it's really wonderful to have that and see how well subscribed the food giveaways are and how excited everyone is to eat all this produce. And because it really does just come back to that. It always comes back to that sharing of food, right? That's like the central uh, guiding purpose. As I mentioned before, building community, but the other, like, that in action, I believe, is literally just sitting together and sharing food and visiting. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. And if there's nothing else, we can move to Q&A.
Thanks, Julian. I just have one more language story to add that I forgot to mention. That's, I think, really important. And it's I met with a nation, somebody who worked in indigenous food in their nation for 15 years as like a steward of the land for the national government. And they told me this story, which is that they went through all their oral histories in their language and just counted the number of times that plant species were mentioned and how many of those plant species like were food. Um, and he said the top 10, so the top 10 mentions in their oral, all their entire oral history that they have access to, um, all of them were extinct off their territory. So again, just showing the interconnectedness of people and land and the effect of being displaced off of your land is really significant. He said that they ended up finding like straggler survivors of a couple of these species after they did this study. They stumbled across it, and it's a really powerful story because one of the species is something that is called wild rice root, and it's a traditional food source here. And it was one of these species that they thought was extinct. And he said one of his best friends stumbled across a patch in the middle of the forest, which would have been near, and he set up a tent, and he was like so excited. They found wild rice root, and set up a tent, and he had a dream, and he dreamed that he was supposed to go out and get his fingers around the roots of the plants. And at the time, they didn't know much about wild rice root. And so he went in and he started just getting his fingers and feeling the bulbs, and then that breaks the little nodules off. And he realized, oh, this is what I'm supposed to do. My ancestors are talking to me in my dream here. I need to come here and I need to get my fingers in the dirt. I need to start like harvesting and breaking the roots so the plant can survive. Um, and so I wanted to share that because I think we sometimes aren't aware of how much has been lost with our displacement off the land and the interconnectedness with plant species that our ancestors had, that these plants relied and rely on us to go out and touch them and be in community with them. So I just wanted to share that story.
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Julian. Yeah, I think you brought so many important aspects about how important and it's the indigenous land management is today when we are talking about climate change situations, and how important is this way to produce, to create this relationship with the land. I was saying, Jacob, now, and I was thinking about, I'm from Brazil, and I was thinking about a recent discovery we have in Brazil, because we have the Amazon forest, and we always considered Amazon forest as an untouched area. However,
However,
now we are discovering that there is no piece of land that indigenous peoples don't manage or have not managing during the memorial times. So I think this is a clue about how important indigenous knowledge is for our current situation on climate change and those realities we are facing right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I think you brought this so beautifully with your experiences. So thank you for that. And I was thinking about the importance of this knowledge today, and you mentioned already the process of training and mentorship you have been doing in your areas, and I have the privilege to visit Julian and see the youth planting and working on the land. So I'd like to hear from you about the importance of this process of training and mentorship and how you were doing this.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Julian.
I was just going to say, Jacob is my mentor for being a mentor, so maybe you can go.
Well, yeah, it's gosh, it's a lot of work. We've we just added up the numbers, and I've actually got a little graphic I can share with you in the near future here. But we have well over 1,000 different Indigenous people that come to our farm every year. Just our location. That doesn't include Julian's farm and some of the other places that we do our best to support. And that adds up to, like, we've added it up and it's over, I think, 400,000 hours have been spent by First Nations and Indigenous people on our farm since we got going in 2019, since we started farming. We didn't start counting the numbers till 2020. Yeah, we've learned a lot of lessons. I know this might address one of the questions I saw in the Q&A, but we've learned that you can't really do high production together with the training, like with the kind of volume that we're doing with people coming. They don't go together at all. So quick example is we plan to partly make our living off farming. I know Julian did this as well. And so I did a very detailed plan. We followed it. It was big time successful. We use innovative, high productivity methods to grow a lot of food on not a lot of land. So one of the questions is how much land. So we have uh, what's it called? A quarter? No, quarter section. So like it used to be 160 acres. About 10 acres of that is cleared today. Over half of it used to be fields, like used to be Gitsan fields in the old days. And so we I'll give you an example. We grow something like a head of lettuce, and I'd had it drilled down. How much time did we spend preparing that bed? How much do we spend on seeds, any inputs like compost, the labor to harvest it, wash it, and get it out the door? And I figured that our cost was like 25 cents per head, like it was very, very low. So it could be a profitable business. So we could sell it to the grocery store, which we did. We could sell it to good food box programs, which we did. You could go to the farmer's market. You could make some money. You could make a living that way. However, the year after, when we started layering in all the community members, all the trainees who are starting from zero, like Julian said, that cost went up 20 times. 20 times more expensive to do the food production with a whole bunch of people who have no clue what they're doing. And you got to slow everything right down. You've got to be a safe space. You got to feed people. Got to like sometimes, well, for us, we have a fleet of 4 vans to go pick people up, and we spend a lot on fuel and repairs. Like it gets very, very, very expensive to do food production and teach at the same time. So I'll say that. Another thing is that we get a lot of demand from people outside of our area. So we've been contacted by about 70 different First Nations, 70, wanting to send people to us, wanting to come to Tea Creek. We only have 7 bedrooms, which is great. Like, so we do have bedrooms. We do host trainees every year from outside of our region. They can come and we have room. The thing that excites me the most about the training is the international stuff. So we hosted an Indigenous family from Australia last summer, and they got a scholarship to come visit us and some other locations around North America. And it was one of the highlights of our year. And I was like, okay, like they learned from us, we learned so much from them. We went and toured like some Hopi Pueblo First Nations down in the States a little over a year ago. Like blew me away, like with what their ancient and modern agricultural food production, food systems technology in their culture was just amazing. And we both want to do exchanges, like we're like, okay, like can you come to us? Can we go to you? Can we send some of our youth to you? Can you send some of our youth to us? And so there's this real excitement, I think, when grassroots Indigenous led community initiatives connect with each other. We're just so happy to learn and to share and to be open with that sharing.
Thank you, Jacob. Do you want to add something, Julian?
Sure, yeah. So we just completed our second year of doing training here, and we're kind of in a different environment. Well, same but different. But here, like the cost of living is hyperinflated due to the presence of significant oil and gas industry in the region. And I've found like with trainees, they're often like really like facing the reality of high navigating a high cost of living, and to be engaged in a training program has been super challenging for some of them. And so just moving forward and kind of exploring what's worked and what hasn't for us, we're like really focusing on trying to create just a few like really good like living wage positions for local Indigenous people to do deep work with us. And that's kind of like been I've always like dreamt that from the beginning, and is like having more people from the community really deeply involved. And so now it's like my real focus is like fostering that, maybe having some summer students that are more like high school that maybe have some support so they're not having to navigate making rent and buying groceries at these crazy prices, and still having that opportunity to have young folks get involved and learn. And then beyond that, like really focusing on more regular workshops that are open to the public around food sovereignty skills or cultural revitalization, or ideally where those two meet. But yeah, that's kind of like as we move forward with what we're doing here. Also, like the training, operating the training as well as like a working farm, a working diverse farm, it just requires a big team of staff, like the admin and reporting alone, bookkeeping, all this stuff. It takes a lot of capacity. And, I guess for other folks, like my takeaway after a good few years, it was actually year three of having folks involved in the farm in different capacities, is like, yeah, you just got to figure out what works for you and your unique situation and your personal capacity, and like really be true to yourself to like avoid um, avoid the big burnout. Like farming alone, farmers all complain about burnout, but then add on like supporting a whole bunch of humans and all of their unique needs every day, and then all the admin burden with all of that as well on top of your standard farm stuff. And then, of course, we have like the joy of navigating ongoing colonialism and historical trauma. And that combination of things can be really, really tiring, all put together. Not without lots of beauty and joy and inspiration sprinkled around in it. But yeah, so we're constantly like just trying to creatively imagine how we could design things in a way that stays true to the service we want to provide, stays true to our cultural and personal values, and feels like we're continuing to do the work in a good and honorable way.
Thank you, Julian and Jacob. I think we have 20 minutes to the end, so I think it's time to go to the Q&A. I want to invite Gretchen, who has been organizing the questions for us. Gretchen is part of the Heritage team. Do you want to introduce yourself, Gretchen?
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Lucas, and big thank you to Jacob and Julian for sharing with us today. As Lucas said, I'm a part of the FPCC Heritage team, and I've been going through the questions and trying to consolidate because there are several themes that have emerged. So I'll go ahead and ask them so we can maximize the time you have to address them. The first kind of theme that emerged, several folks have asked questions about how to be good allies to Indigenous agriculture, Indigenous neighboring farms. So as those questions came in, so how can provincial staff be good allies? How can neighboring farms be good allies in neighboring towns? And then there was a question about, is there a role for academia? So maybe neighboring universities or university students to show allyship and support for farms like yours and other folks who are doing traditional agricultural revitalization.
Sure. Great question. So first of all, what makes Julian and I successful, one of the many ingredients, many ingredients, is that we're doing Indigenous-led work. That means that a majority of the decisions at every level every day are made by Indigenous people. So if you listen to Julian's stories about the elders just showing up and participating and then sitting down in the shade, that's Indigenous-led. It's the same thing here. If you're here on site today, you're going to see Indigenous people at every level making all the decisions all day long. As soon as you start to introduce non-Indigenous decision makers, you dilute that and you're going to dilute the effectiveness. So an example is we don't need a procedure and policy handbook on how to be reconciliatory because we're making Indigenous decisions all the time, and that's directly impacting our success. So what I'm getting at is if you want to be an ally, you need to increase the Indigenous-led components of every single project. You shouldn't have non-Indigenous people being the final decision maker or the manager, the grassroots, like you need Indigenous people at all those levels to get the success. The other thing I'm going to add to that really quickly is there's all this talk of reconciliation and no action. Then the proof is in the pudding, folks. So if reconciliation is working, why did First Nations life expectancy just drop by 6 years? 6 years. If we are doing better job in health, in education, economic development, that should not be happening. We should see increases in First Nations life expectancy. Okay. We shouldn't see post-secondary institutions in Canada with only 2% of their entire staffing levels being Indigenous, Métis, Inuit, and First Nations. 2%. We shouldn't have post-secondary institutions gobbling up our culture, intellectual property, creating curriculums, paying non-Indigenous people to create Indigenous content, Indigenous courses. It should be us doing that. So if you want to be a good ally, hire Julian, hire Indigenous people to develop our own content, our own courses, our own programs, like support us to do it. We shouldn't see only less than 1% of philanthropy dollars going to Indigenous priorities. We're not even talking Indigenous organizations, folks. We're talking Indigenous priorities. Less than 1% of philanthropy dollars in this country go to Indigenous priorities, and Indigenous led is a fraction of that 1%. Less than 1% of decision makers in Canada within publicly traded companies are Indigenous. So that's board members and executives and senior managers. So we're doing and in the, you want to talk province, you want to talk government, the BC Ministry of Agriculture last year only had three public servants across the whole ministry who are Indigenous. Three. So how are they going to do a good job of implementing support with only three public servants who are Indigenous? We got to change that. So if you want to be an ally, look within your organization, look at the hard, cold facts on how your organization is doing with reconciliation to make change. And let's stop talking reconciliation, folks, until we start seeing real change happening across these public, private, the mainstream sectors in Canada.
Yeah, I think that's a great like macro overview of the scenario, like parity. Like Jacob brought forward to me like the disparity of funding available for these community food hubs in Indigenous communities versus non. And we're within a circle. There's another. Well, I know a few other actually folks around the province that are establishing these Indigenous food hubs, and that's just like a single example of where there should be parity of funding dollars available to our communities. They're available to any other, whether we are operating through band council system or operating independent as grassroots Indigenous people. We have the right to do so, and it should be acknowledged as such in all cases. And then on the micro scale, for some of you that are like, well, I'm not really involved in policy. I'm not involved with these big orgs. Like I think um, like meaningful relationship is the starting place. So no matter where you are, you're on Indigenous traditional territory, you're on Indigenous lands, and like, do you have a working relationship? How much time and energy are you putting into establishing a relationship and understanding and meaningful friendship with folks from the local nation where you are, and figuring out how you can serve uh, that community? Because it's we're very very diverse groups. So there's many Indigenous nations across so-called British Columbia, and we all have kind of different views, and I mean there's some shared views, but there's a lot of diversity. And I think like in terms of like what would be considered like a small farm or whatever, but you still have a quarter section. Like one of the programs I really love, and I don't know, I've never talked to Jacob about it. I don't know how he feels about it, but I love the Treaty Land Sharing Network. Like I am like first and foremost, like I am a hunter. Like that is my role in my community. I hunt for my family, and um, that is kind of like the strongest part of our living culture is that practice. And like there sure is a ton of private land here I wish I could hunt on. So much of it is not accessible. So much of our ancestral spots are not accessible. Like open that up. Open your farm up. Do a call out. Reach out to your local First Nation. Say, I have all this land. We're growing some crops right here, but like there's a ton of ducks and geese out here. Maybe maybe you want to bring some community members down and do a harvest here.
Mm.
We got good berry patches here, and there
Right.
is no treaty land sharing network in BC, but similar work could happen here. And I think for people with small farms that aren't involved with the industry and big orgs or feel like they have no say in these funding programs, that's like a wonderful way. It really comes down to meaningful relationship, and try again, and try again. You might be hitting your head against the wall, feeling like you're not getting a reply because your email is going to some email on the band website that's leading to a dead end. You got to work around and have that human connection. And yeah, just be open and humble and have that desire in your heart, and you can make good things happen.
Great. Thank you both so much for those thoughtful replies. We have another set of questions, all related to decisions with the community about what to grow. So how do you decide with the community what to grow? And related to that, what types of activities have your communities done to also revitalize traditional processing or storage, maybe meal planning or recipes, to support knowledge transfer and also to decrease waste?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean,
Yeah.
I really encourage you to look into your history of your nation, your territory from a big wide lens. Because I saw a comment about, hey, in our culture and history, we don't meant like plants were just medicines, like we didn't grow plants for food. Totally get it. But there's something else there. Was it, aquaculture? Was it fish? Was it I know in the interior, like Chilcotin in that kind of area, for example, they had these super famous baskets and they used to grow willows, like this domesticated willow, red sandbar willow, just to make these baskets that nearly went extinct, and then the baskets were part of this whole food system of trading and everything like that. And so, yeah, and then I was talking to another nation recently who are like, our climate's way too cold, we can't grow vegetables. And I say, hang on, you're which nation? You're what location? Did you know, go back in your history, I've got a book here that your nation was home to one of BC's largest and most profitable ranches before the government agents came in and stole it and pieced it up and auctioned it off. Like had all kinds of animals. So they weren't growing plants, but they were maintaining this massive, healthy grassland of over 20,000 acres with all this big diversity of cool animals that were, it was valuable food and business back then. Yeah, kale. I saw the kale comment. Yeah, we cut back our kale every year. You're right, it grows like crazy. However, what I will say is the kale, for example, is part of what is called the brassica family of vegetables. This like very green, nutritious family that includes broccoli and cabbage and cauliflower and lots of other greens. And so what we find in our culture is there's a lot of Chinese cuisine tradition that we call traditional food now because Chinese, Asian people, and First Nations here were forced into the same kind of ghettos. And so our cuisine fused. So we've actually transitioned to a lot of Asian vegetables, and people really want that. Like they go like crazy here. They grow super well, just as well as kale does. And people want their Gai Lan, they want their daikon radish. Like we can't grow enough. They want the, Hakurei turnips. They want, the broccoli and the cabbage. We can't grow enough cabbage. So yeah, then the other piece is food education. So as an example, squash grows like a weed here. Like we get crazy squash production. It's an indigenous food. It's not from here traditionally, but it's indigenous. And it's been a real struggle. Like we've cut back on our squash just because it's a struggle. People just want to carve them into pumpkins. They don't understand, hey, you can make this super delicious food, and there's a big variety of squash flavors. So we started using our label maker to print recipes and stick them on the squashes when we give them away. And I've done videos on how easy they are to cook and how nutritious they are. So, and then we do convert people bit by bit. They come and they're like, okay, we want some lemon cucumbers as a fun example. We grew that. It grew produced like wild. Certain species of tomatoes do incredibly well here. So there is a mix of both growing what people want and what your climate will support. your food system will support. And then also, and I have a photo I was going to share, but I don't think we have time, but also adapting crops. So for example, we grew something called New Zealand spinach because we get extremely hot summers now, like 40 plus degrees sometimes. It's ridiculous. And that'll kill a lot of these cold crops like your cabbages and such, like if you're not careful and you don't do something to protect them. So New Zealand spinach is a plant that loves the heat, and it grows like it's a weed in New Zealand, and it grows like a weed and it tastes like spinach. So we grew that in abundance this year, and everybody who likes spinach, we just convert them over. We're like, hey, try this. We got tons of it in the heat of the summer. Take as much as you want. So it's a little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of have a few different strategies too. Like people like the classics here, and it's funny because if you pick up like one of Nancy Turner's old books or whatever, and it'll say like other food crops grown by First Nations, other than our, it's always like potato, onion, turnip. I think her interior and coastal, right? It has this list, and I'm like, funnily enough, that's like what people like here the most.
Totally.
Yeah, it's like the foundation. People really like turnips, like or rutabaga. They'll just call turnips too, right? Because that's like your stew. So they had, I think there's this ancestral connection: carrot, potato, onion, turnip. Throw in cabbage, and we like could give away an almost endless amount of those crops. But at the same time, we grow everything we can. Like we're in climate zone 3B. And so there's only so much crops we can grow here. And we pretty much grow everything we can and we bring it all. And when we do our giveaways, we set up our display every bit as beautiful as if we were in the highest end farmers market for our people. And we'll share with them uh, information if they don't know. But everyone's super adventurous, and we have that trust, and people are super excited if there's something they don't know. And then everyone's posting on our Facebook afterwards, like pictures of what they cook with it. We've had some moms making baby food and sharing that. And so, it's not like we're like abstracted from modern reality. People are just like people everywhere, and they like want to try everything at the market, and it's fun. So there's that adventurous spirit, and it's great. Garlic scapes has been one where like we had an elder think they were green beans, and then he grabbed a big bag of garlic scapes, and then he drove his side by side over to my house the next day. He's like, "What the heck are these things?" And I told him, and he cooked them up, and like now they're like people's favorite. People are pissed off that we don't have garlic scapes all season. I'm like, no, it's about 2 weeks a year you get these things. I'm sorry. Um, so like lots of just fun interactions. The giveaway is kind of like a party. Like we have a set time and we come down from the farm just down to the highway. There's like a frontage road that's really easy access because we have limited parking on site. And sometimes there'll be over 20 vehicles there waiting for us to set up. And we have to be like, wait, we need to set up. This is stressful. Back up, please. Give us 10 minutes. And then they're like all lined up. And it's funny because there's like the same 10 like absolute regulars that never miss it. They're there for open every single time. And then from there, it's like everyone's coming. And we had an unprecedented amount of people accessing it this year. So that's a lot of fun. But then in terms of like pet projects, like for me, I'm obviously geeking out on Indigenous agriculture, and I just love Indigenous food stories. And I'll just share because I'm like right beside this rack of storage crops that don't like the cold and humidity of the root cellar, and I'm looking at a few like this is the lower Salmon River squash.
Beautiful.
Which I've been seed saving. So we only grow one Maxima at a Misk farm because I am trying to maintain the genetics of this squash and select it for our site and climate. And my understanding, unfortunately, I've never actually connected, but this squash is from was growing in what's come to be known as Washington State pre-contact. And it does really, really well here, like most Maximas. And we only really have a guarantee of like an 88-day growing season or something, although that's been longer lately. But this Maximas are usually like 120, 130 days, right? 110. This one is a winner here. And so we just keep saving seed from like the best examples of it that are like the sweetest, thickest flesh. And yeah, that's really fun. And then there's one more. Um, our flower corn. So this is the ooh. There's just bins of it here, but this is the Gaspé Flint corn. It's called, which is um, pre-contact. This was the corn that was bred by Indigenous people. It was the northernmost corn bred by Indigenous folks pre-contact. This corn is like a subarctic corn, and it's been bred so brilliantly, that it makes me question. It makes me question the normally accepted history of agriculture and crop breeding on the planet, because this corn is so advanced that there's no way that the wheat started to be bred before this corn that came from a grass. This is the most genius plant technology to ever emerge from humanity, and it was bred by Indigenous people across uh, Mesoamerica and all the way up into our ancestral lands. This corn grows like 4 feet high and starts to fruit in the shortest growing season. And we have enough this season that for the first time we're going to nixtamalize it and make masa here on the farm, which is so wonderful for us. This is a project I've been working on with many other seed savers because corn requires a lot of genetic diversity. And so I try to connect with other people that are excited about this flint corn and share seed with each other to keep that gene pool widening, but also maintain the what we need out of it, which is that super short growing window and days to maturity.
Well, Julian's inspired me to pop out to our outdoor kitchen. You might see my breath. There's Ezra, there's Kirk, and our funding's kind of over for the year, but one thing that's central to our culture here is eating together. We've done it since it was just our farm day one. Like, come join us for soup, come sit around the fire. So, anyways, we make what we call food sovereignty soup, which is literally just everything from the farm. So I'm just going to grab a little spoonful here to give you a sense of, I don't know, sense of what. I don't know, I can't. Yeah, you can see that. So what have we got? It looks like we got.
So we've got our green peppers
Green
here,
peppers.
which were vacuum sealed and frozen. Same with the cabbage. We've got corn that is also grown by us and jarred by Kirk. Our carrots, lamb that was butchered here last month or the month before. Celery is the only thing that's in here that's not ours.
I hate growing celery.
Yeah, it's so picky. It's so hard to grow it. Our onions
I refuse.
and yeah, our cabbage, and then we've got our potatoes in a separate pot, and we're just about to add them.
Nice. Yeah, potatoes here. So yeah, potatoes are probably one of our main crops. And we actually did a 60,000 pound potato rescue this year. It was a huge success. We have a list of First Nations communities and organizations in our whole region, and we just emailed them if there's a surplus, bring vehicles. I've got photos of us loading up like semi trucks to send out to communities. So we built a new root cellar with the support of First Peoples Culture Council. Huge success last year. And we were able to put all 60,000 pounds of the rescued potatoes in the root cellar, and then we were able to distribute it all over the space of, I think it was like 2 weeks. And I think we held back one sack of like 2,000 pounds just for our own giveaways here and use in the kitchen. But yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for sharing with us. We're all so grateful to be able to learn from you today. I can close us out because I know we're at 11:32. So close out with gratitude for both of you and for the team that put on the online learning series. We really thank you for sharing your deep knowledge and the planning that goes into Indigenous food sovereignty projects, particularly the ones that you're spearheading. It's clear that there's an incredible amount of hard work that goes into this. But what really also came through was the generosity, the relationships that you're in and that you're strengthening and building, and also the joy in this work for you really comes through. It's so inspiring. And I know that you're probably going to have a lot, I know you already have a lot of folks reaching out to you to see how they could become involved with the work that you're doing. And I expect that you'll probably hear from some new folks after this as well. Again, we're so grateful to you both. So thank you. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thank you. And I just want to again thank First Peoples Culture Council for their incredible support of our work last year and this year. It means so much and has such a deep impact. So keep up the good work at FPCC, everybody there. Thank you. And thank you everybody for taking time to come. What an honor. What an inspiration.
Yeah, must cho.
Seems like we got to do a follow-up, hey? There needs to be a part 2. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank
Jacob and
you.
Julian.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Take care.
Yeah.